All right, it is 2 o'clock by my watch, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Stacy Matrazo. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on how to create a pollinator pot. This week is National Pollinator Week, and we are celebrating the bees and butterflies and other insects that make our lives possible. Pollinators play an important role in maintaining healthy ecosystems, and they're also essential to our food supplies. So think about it. Every third bite of food you eat, you should thank a pollinator for that. Crops like our blueberries, watermelon, oranges, all of our fruits and vegetables, and so much more rely on the services of insects. But pollinator survival is threatened by the effects of climate change, habitat loss due to development, pesticide use, and so many other things. But there is good news. You can provide the habitat that our pollinators need to survive by adding native plants and wildflowers to your landscape. Even small changes can make a difference for our native pollinators, and today's webinar will show you how to do it. For those of you not familiar with our organization, our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitat through our education, research, planting, and conservation programs. You can find out more about our work and what we do at www.flawildflowers.org. Our work is made possible primarily through the sale and renewal of the state wildflower license plate. The funds that that's our old look. Here's our new look. Whether you have the old look or the new look, you are supporting us, and we thank you for that. The funds from the sale and renewal, along with donations and membership, allow us to support and create the projects that build awareness and knowledge of native wildflowers and plants throughout Florida. We'd like you to consider becoming a member, making a donation, or purchasing the state wildflower license plate. If you purchase or have the plate, you're also eligible for membership. So just let us know if you have the tag, and we'll get you set up in our database as a member. Be sure to check out our website for resources on planting and growing wildflowers, to learn where to see wildflowers in bloom, upcoming events, and more. We're also on social media. You can find us on most platforms at FLA Wildflowers. We do have a few other things on the calendar. Our next webinar will be on July 20th. James Stevenson, the extension agent for Pinellas County IFAS, will present Before They Were Native, a brief history of Florida's flora, which will explore a simplified timeline of the events that led to the flowers and other flora that we know as native today. If you've never seen James speak, you're in for a real treat. He's not only informative, but he's incredibly entertaining too. So you can register for that on our website. And again, be sure to follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to stay abreast of our upcoming webinar and field trip opportunities. I do have a couple of housekeeping items to go over before we get started. All attendees are muted. Your cameras are off. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. Yes, the chat is active, but we will not be monitoring that for your questions. So use the Q&A. We will address the questions at the end of the talk as time permits. If your question's not answered, you can email it to us at info@flawildflowers.org. We will get it to Kirsten or answer it if it's something we can answer as well. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our website and our YouTube channel within about 24 to 48 hours. When it is available, you will receive an email from us with a link to the recording, along with a resource page with links from the webinar and other relevant links that will help you in your journey to add native plants to your landscape. And we'll also include Kirsten's contact info as well. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Kirsten Sharp is the co-owner of My Dragonfly Gardens, a firm specializing in landscape and habitat design in native and Florida-friendly plants. Kirsten was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, where her love of plants grew out of experiences in her family's one-acre garden, as well as time spent exploring botanical gardens, parks, and other natural areas in the South African countryside. She's lived in many different places around the world and has grown a plethora of plants, including roses and lavender in the mountains of California, 73 types of Hosta in Germany, and many vegetables, fruits, and herbs everywhere that she's lived. In 2015, she moved to Florida and started working at Green Isle Gardens, a native plant nursery in Groveland. There, she was able to follow her dreams of creating habitat havens for people and critters to enjoy, an opportunity that led her to start her own habitat design business. Kirsten also serves on the board of the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you, Kirsten.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are ready to learn some information about pollinator pots. Stacy, do we have the PowerPoint up? Hello?
Sorry, I muted myself.
It's all right.
No, I'm not seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, so let me just work out what's going on here, and I have to share the screen. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay.
You are good to go.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this little talk about creating pollinators in a pot. As Stacy very kindly said, I've been doing this now for nearly just over 7 years, and I found my love. I did a wonderful well, I've had a lot of experiences trying to do different things with regards to natives, and I enjoy doing pollinator pots. It's a great way to get people involved in doing something, whether you have a large or small property, it doesn't make any difference. You can still create or plant some pollinator pots. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of the ways to do this. So I'm sure everybody is familiar of all the stuff that is going on in Florida with the loss of habitat that we have going on. And you hopefully will realize that it is very important to plant some natives in your garden, whether it's just in a pot or whether it's, you know, a couple of things in the garden. Every little bit helps. And that's what I like to try and get people to understand, that it is so important to plant natives. They are our pot. Without them, we don't have food, exactly like Stacy said. I did not realize every third mouthful of your food is because of pollinators. So by doing something like this, you're actually creating that habitat in your garden. And you can't only just have pollinator plants. To create that ecosystem or that habitat for critters, you need to have larval host plants as well as a nectar source and possibly even a food source for birds with berries. So hopefully today I will go over some plants that will make great pots. I have planted these pots before. All the photos that are on here are pots that I have done and experimented with. They are now almost a year old and they're doing great. The plants are thriving. And, you know, you can tell that they actually work because of the way they're doing, and pollinators like them. We're getting larval host plants on them. So they are, you know, it's something that is easily enough to be done. I have given a lot of information on this PowerPoint, so I know Stacy will share it with everybody. So I'm not going to talk about a lot of the stuff that is on the PowerPoint. You'll be able to look at that, but I'm going to give you information about, you know, the potting soil, how to pot them, the best ways to keep them going. You know, this is Florida. We get very hot in the summertime, so of course pots do dry out. But at least after this, hopefully you should have more of an idea of how easy it is to do. Now, this is one of my pots that I'd used. This is a sun to part shade pot. The more sun it has, the better for the rosin flower, but it can handle part shade. And, you know, our hottest time here in Florida is the afternoon between 1 and 5. So if it's a sun-loving pot, then it needs that afternoon sun. Now, the plants that I used in here, these are the three of the plants that I use: rosin flower or Silphium asteriscus. It is one of my go-tos. I love this plant because it flowers for a really long time. The pollinators love it, and it has little nectary tubes in it. So until every single one of those nectary tubes in the center of the flower are open, it will just keep flowering. So the flower is lost anything from a week to 2 to 3 weeks. It is very easy to maintain because you don't need to do a lot of work with it. Once you have it, if you do deadhead it, it keeps the flower spike shorter. If you don't, it just gets taller. And last year, interestingly enough, I actually saw some rosin flower that had got up to over 5 foot tall. So that was planted out in the gardens, not actually in a pot. But it is a great pollinator plant. It also gives you some height in a pot. This was a plant that I used at the back of the pot. It has very hard, very spiky or hard sandpaper-like leaves. So it's a very drought-tolerant plant. Not a lot of the deer will not eat it, and I don't think bunnies will either. So in that respect, it is good to have. But as I say, the pollinators love it. The other plant that I used in there is one of our larval host plants, and it's Corky stem passion vine. I use this a lot because it is one of our few passion vines that actually stays where it's supposed to. Maypop is a wonderful passion vine, but it does work in a pot, but it does go totally winter dormant, so you will lose it. But Corky stem I like to use because it stays smaller in a pot. It has little tiny flowers, the typical passion flower flower, and then blackberries that the birds love. It is a larval host plant, as you can see on my PowerPoint, for the zebra longwing and the Gulf fritillary. Our zebra longwing is Florida state butterfly, and a fun fact that I learned last year is it is one of the few butterflies that not only drinks nectar, it also eats pollen, and it actually can live up to 6 months. So I think that's a fascinating fact that our state butterfly can actually live that long. The new butterfly that I did not know about that also uses it as their larval host plant is a Julia. So that was an interesting fact that I found out when I was doing this research for this PowerPoint. And as you can see, the Corky stem passion vine, an interesting fact as well, is it is pollinated by wasps, and it's some of our little native wasps. The last plant that I used in this one is swamp twinflower. Now, swamp twinflower I use a lot in design as well as in pots. It is a great ground cover plant for shady pathways next to flagstones. And it is evergreen and it has lavender flowers. It is also our larval host plant for the common buckeye. It's also good to have different size flowers in pots for different size butterflies and different size pollinators. Our bees and our butterflies, we have different sizes here in Florida. So it's important to have flowers that will actually accommodate all the different size proboscis for those insects. So those are the 3 that I used for that pot. Now, let me get into some of the details about planting the soil. People have asked me before, what kind of potting soil do you use for a pot? And of course, you know, the best type of soil is to use some form of sterile soil. You don't want something that has a load of fertilizers and things like that in it, because native plants are normally used to growing in sand, very nutrient poor sand for most part. And if you put them into a potting soil from the DIY stores that has a lot of nutrients, those plants are going to possibly grow too fast or have problems. So I normally recommend, if you do want to use it, is to use a sterile potting soil. And the sterile potting soil, you can sometimes buy that from the native plant nurseries. Sometimes they sell that. That is most of the time where I get mine from. If you do have potting soil that is from a garden center and you're not sure, add some sand to it. If you can get hold of some clean sand, what that will do is just to help break down some of the nutrients a little bit more and add more texture, add more drainage to it. The other thing is, if you're using a sterile one, you have more control of what type of fertilizer or what type of nutrients you add in there. The sterile potting soil that I get from the nurseries most of the time has sand, wood chips, and pine bark and bits and pieces like that. So it adds some organic content to it. The other thing is, if you make your own compost. I don't know how many people nowadays do that. I love to do that. It's, I like to use food scraps and to be able to put them into a compost area and let it decay. And that is also a great thing that you can add into the pot to help add some form of nutrients. The fertilizers that I normally use, it works the best for me, I use it to fertilize any of my food crops, I use it to fertilize my natives, is an organic chicken poop. That way you have a control over how much you give it. And this is a fairly fast acting fertilizer, so you can use that, to give the plants a boost. That said, natives generally don't need much nutrient. And when you get the plants from a native nursery, most of the time they have some form of slow release fertilizer in the pot with them. So to begin with, you're not going to need a lot of nutrients in the ground for the plants to start growing. Pots Pots are the great thing with the pot is use your imagination. You know, the bigger the pot, the more fun you can have. Bearing in mind that if you do use a big pot, oh, and hi, this is Rodney. He has got to come and say hello. He likes to get involved when I do these things. So yes, you have to go that side. Pots, as I said, pots. I have tried different size pots in this presentation. You'll see different size ones. I've used tall, narrow ones, wide, flat ones. It just depends what type of things you want to grow. You know, sorry about this. Go on, stay there. Pots can also be used in shady areas, in sunny areas. It doesn't really matter. I have got on this PowerPoint, there is different areas where you can use the pots. In the bottom of the pots, if you have pots with holes, you need to make sure that you cover the bottoms with some form of broken terracotta pots. I always collect broken pots and keep the pieces to use that for drainage. Native plants need to be able to drain unless they're aquatic or wetlands, and then they would be quite happy with wet feet, but most of the sun-loving ones will need to have some form of drainage. What I normally do is take 3 or 4 pieces and put it over the top of each hole. You want to be able to have some form of the water being able to get out of the pot. So that is crocks to use in the bottom of the pots. Now, planting, when you're planting them, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with planting things, but there are a couple of things that I would like to mention about when you're planting. Let's move on to the next PowerPoint. This is just some information. I like to give little notes about what type of plants, why I use them. And of course, this is also telling you about water, fertilizer, and everything. At the bottom, and Stacey will give you this, is the references that I use to get the plants from. And these are plants I'm familiar with. I've been using them for years, and I know they grow, and I know they grow well in the garden and grow well in pots. When you're planting up stuff in a pot, you need to put some form of the potting soil in the bottom of the pot, and then make sure you have enough soil at the bottom that will bring the plant to about 1 inch from the top of the pot. You need to have some area to be able to pour water into. You also don't want to, if the plants are established in their pots and the soil stays put, then that's great, but you need to make sure there is no root circling. Most of our perennials usually won't hurt by having that. They will usually handle that. If they do have root circling, you need to break the soil up a little bit. And by that, I mean at the bottom of the pot, when you take the plant out of the pot, you need to kind of break it away a little bit to loosen the roots a little bit so that they can actually go into the ground easier and they're not circling. Shrubs are usually more of a problem if there is root circling going on. And if you do have root circling, you either need to pull the soil apart so that you can pull the root out, or you can cut it. I know a lot of people freak out sometimes when you say cutting roots, but that way it actually establishes new growth and sends out new roots. What else do I want to talk about? So planting, as I was saying about the planting, depending on what you want to do with the pot, if you want to actually place it against a wall or have something behind it, this pot that I was talking about before with the rosin flower and the corky stem is a vine. So it can be grown over the side of the pot, or you can actually put a small trellis at the back of the pot to grow it up. And that was the idea of using that in there. I have since left the corky stem just to grow over the side and trail onto the ground, and occasionally I trim it. So it does fine like that. That is not a problem. The swamp twin flower is also a type of it will hang over the edge. It only gets to about normally 7 or 8 inches tall if it's on the ground, in the pot. If it's on the ground and planted somewhere, it can get up to about 8 to 10 inches. I haven't seen it much taller than that. But in the pot, it will hang over the side. So that's a nice one to use towards the front of the pot. The rosin flowers, I say, are used at the back. So when you plant them, you need to make sure that you get potting soil around the sides and, in between the plants. You want to make sure that they're fairly firmly in place. There's no air gaps. Air gaps in Florida are not as bad as up north, but you still don't want to have spaces between, because what will happen is the soil will eventually move down and then you will have gaps. So you need to make sure you firmly place the plants into the pots. Let's go to the next one. Now, this is just some additional plants that will work well in the sun to pot shade. All of these, there are a selection of different kinds. I have grown purple coneflower in pots very successfully. I've grown Stokes aster in pots very successfully. They would be fun to add with something else, because purple coneflower and Stokes aster, they keep their basil leaves on the ground and they have flower spikes. So you need something else that will either give it more height behind, or otherwise something that will stay lower in the front. That would be a nice combination to add some swamp twin flower to as well. Brown savory is another trailing plant. It is an edible and it prefers more moisture. So that would be kind of a fun one to add with a cut leaf coneflower. The thing with native pots and pollinator pots, have fun with them, you know, try different things, different combinations. I have a very, very big blue pot at the moment, a glazed pot that I want to plant a firebush in. And I am going to most probably add a Corky stem passion vine to that and possibly some swamp twin flower or something like that. The reason I'm adding the Corky stem to the firebush is it is a companion planting. And by doing that, you're actually creating a companion planting pot, because the larval host plant for the zebras and the Gulf fritillary is the passion vine. And then their nectar source is the firebush. So you're kind of creating that whole ecosystem there, just literally with 2 plants. A few of the other ones, a swamp milkweed, of course, that is our native milkweed for Florida, one of our native milkweeds. That one does get pretty tall if it doesn't get eaten. So, of course, that's another fun one that you could add into a pot, put it towards the back of a pot. You don't want it to be too close to the front because, of course, if it gets eaten, all you're going to see is sticks. And that I have seen that swamp milkweed get to about 4.5 foot tall if it's not eaten down all the time. So that just gives you a selection of other plants. You know, the thing with any of these plants is you can try them. If they don't work, you can always take them out and put them somewhere else, or otherwise you can put them into a different pot. So have fun with it. These plants, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with some of these, but I can go through some of the other ones. Spiderwort is a great pollinator plant for our bees. It is one that you will see flowering on the sides of the roads anywhere in wetland or with moist areas in Florida in the early spring. For me, it always signifies spring because that lovely bright blue purpley blue flower is there busy flowering. It's also edible, and I have heard of somebody before make a quiche from it, and they said it was very nice, tastes like spinach. So that's just a couple of the others. That there are a mixture of larval host plants on there and nectar plants. So let's move to a sun-loving pot. This one is, as you can see, it is in the full sun, and it is a lovely plant for it. Also, sorry, it will also attract our hummingbirds. The 2 of the plants that are in there will attract the hummingbirds. This one, tropical sage. Now, there are 3 different colors of native tropical sage, Salvia coccinea. There is a white, there is a red, and there is a pink. And fun fact about these, if you plant a red one and a white one near each other, they don't have to be in the same pot, but near each other in the same garden or in the same vicinity, you will end up having cross-pollination, and you'll end up with salmon pink, pale pink, red, white, different shades of the coloring. So it's kind of fun. That is a great plant for our pollinators and for our hummingbirds. It's really neat to see the hummingbirds coming around and look nectaring from the tropical sage when they're in flower. Tropical sage also flowers on and off throughout the year. The wintertime, not quite so much, but early spring and late fall, it is prolific. And then during the summer, on and off. It's a great typical sage, so it's very easy to deadhead. You can just nip out the buds once the seeds are spent. And if you want more plants, they will grow really well from seed. It's also a great plant to be able to spread to your neighbors. I like it because it's an easy way to say, oh, here's a plant and it's really fun and bright and cheerful for your garden. And they don't realize you're giving them a little bit of Florida, a native plant, and it's also going to help spread more areas for pollinators. Another one I use in here is another sage. It's lyre leaf sage. Lyre leaf sage, most of the time when you see it growing out there wild, it is growing in or underneath our oak trees. It loves to grow under the oak trees. That one and creeping sage, those are the 2 you see a lot under oak trees. Lyre leaf sage, I love the blue flowers on that one, and it flowers at different times to the tropical sage. So it's kind of a fun combination. The neat thing about lyre leaf sage is it also has very deeply veined or deeply cut leaves. And sometimes you will have a venation of almost like a purpley color in the veins. So when you find plants like that, it's really neat to see the different venation on the leaves. And by that, I mean, it's the veins. The veins in the leaves are almost like a purple color. The other plant, again, I used a swamp twin flower. I use swamp twin flower a lot for many reasons. I know it works great. I know it's a nectar plant and a host plant, and it flowers it flowers pretty well all on and off throughout the year, and it is evergreen. So that is why I've used it quite a few times. I like it as well because it's a cheerful little plant. And as I mentioned before, you need the different size flowers for the different pollinators. So in this pot, we have 3 different size flowers there for the different pollinators. The larval host plant, again, in this one, of course, is the swamp twin flower. that's just giving you some more information about the different plants there. And let's see, let's go to the next one. While I'm on about it and thinking about it, watering, watering is a really important plant, or a really important aspect of Florida and pots. There are different ways for doing water if you're fairly handy and you want to make sure that you don't have to worry about it getting water every day, or you just have a very small area to water and you want to grow pots. There are some great little irrigation systems out there that can run on a timer. And something like this, a small pot, depending on what size pot it is, of course, but a pot outside, you can run a drip irrigation up the back of the pot or through the middle of the pot, and then just have a small little dripper or a sprayer. I would say you most probably only need about 10 minutes a day for these type of pots just to water. And of course, water them in morning, early morning, or late afternoon after the sun has gone. And that way, you know that the plants get there enough water and you don't have to worry about them not getting enough. If a pot ever dries out to an extent where it is, the water won't absorb, and this is actually a term called hydrophobic. It's hydrophobic sand or hydrophobic soil. And what happens is the pots have got to it's got to an extent where they're so dry that they can't absorb anymore. So what you need to do, you can pour water over it till, the sun doesn't shine anymore, and you'll still not be able to the plants will not be able to absorb. You need to break that. And how you do that is by putting the pot, and if it's not too heavy, of course, into another container that does not have a hole, and then pouring water from the top and letting a few inches of water in the bottom sit. And leave the pot sitting in this water for a little while. And what will happen, it will break the bond that the sand has, and it will actually allow the water to soak up. One thing that I did do, and I will tell you not to do, is forget about it and leave it in there too long, especially for plants that don't like too much water to that extent. But this way, it's a good way to kind of break that barrier and stop the water from being hydrophobic. So just a FYI about that one. And another thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning, this is an awesome way to get children involved. Children are curious and want to know things. And I think it's a really wonderful way to get them to start being involved in the garden, to start learning how to handle plants, how to enjoy them. You can make it a fun summer project, create a pot and watch how it works over the summer, watch how many butterflies come to it, keep a track of them, see how many caterpillars you get on the larval host plants and things like that. That's a wonderful way to, nurture that curiosity about plants and nature, because they are our future. So it is important to get them involved. And it's a really great way to have some fun with them. You can even take them to a nursery, a native plant nursery, and let them pick some plants out, guide them in the right direction. But that would be a fun way. So some of the plants I've got here for additional plants for hot sun. Some of our native plants really need it hot and dry, and they prefer it more if it's that way. The Bahama Cassia is a native plant, a larval host plant for some of our sulfur butterflies. It's a great little shrub or a woody perennial, and it has the most beautiful bright yellow flowers that are pea-shaped, and it flowers on and off throughout the summer. It is most of the time it's evergreen as well, so that would create quite a nice size shrub for the back of a pot. Normally they only get to 4 foot tall supposedly, but I have seen them a little bit bigger than that. But in a pot you can control that a little bit more. Of course, don't cut it when the caterpillars are on there or it's flowering. You don't want to lose the flowers. Another one that's one of my favorites on there is porterweed, blue porterweed. Now the native porterweed is low growing and spreading. It's a ground cover that doesn't get more than about 1.5 feet tall and spreads out to at least 3 foot. Fun fact about that is it has very small, tiny little blue flowers. So it's good for our smaller butterflies, but the flowers are also edible and they taste like mushrooms. So that's kind of a quirky, fun thing to know. Fog fruit, that's another one of our great pollinator plants and also our host plants. It is a great ground cover that likes part sun, or it can handle full sun, and it can also handle part shade. It can handle moisture and not so much moisture, so it's very adaptable. Brown savory, again, is an edible, but that one is also a little bit more moisture loving, even though it can handle sun. And long-sleeve tick-seed, this one is a great perennial for sunny areas or part shade. It will flower regardless wherever it is, and it does spread really easy. So that's another native that you can grow very easily from seed. So those are the sun-loving additional. Now, a fun way to experiment and try some different stuff is I created a wetland or aquatic pot. And you can do this multiple ways. This pot actually had a hole in it, so I used a saucer with some gravel in it to keep that moisture. You need to keep that moisture content, you know, so that it stays moist. This one, it's got a new plant to me, which was Prairie coneflower. And it is a really pretty yellow one. Unfortunately, when I did the picture, I cut off the flowers, but it does have very striking yellow flowers. And it's a typical coneflower in that it has the petals reversed. And that one is, let me get to the name so you can see, it is a Retiba pinnata. Sorry, excuse my butchering of the Latin name. That one is actually flowering at the moment again, and it's a great pollinator plant for our bees and our butterflies. Now, I also used aquatic milkweed. There is a lot of, not necessarily controversy, but there is a lot of uncertainty, and I don't know whether Stacy knows any different now or whether anything has changed, but an aquatic milkweed is one of our few native milkweeds in Florida that does not go dormant in the winter. And that could be a problem because of OE and the monarchs staying and not migrating where they should do. It is one that I do grow in a pond, and it does sometimes not necessarily go winter dormant, but it does die back at certain times, and then it renews again. So whether that counteracts the OE, I don't know. But there is a lot of wonder about whether we should cut it back in the spring, in the winter time. That, of course, is our larval host plant for the monarch, for the queen, and the soldier butterfly. And of course, nectar source for our butterflies as well. Now, aquatic milkweed doesn't get as tall as the swamp milkweed. Aquatic milkweed only gets to about 1 foot tall, maybe a little bit more, and it has very pretty white flowers. It does flower a lot more than the swamp milkweed, and the pollinators really enjoy that. Again, I use swamp twinflower in that pot. Same thing, same reason, because of the larval host plant and because of it being evergreen and flowering for a long period of time. And there is some more information about those. The prairie coneflower is really striking, and I think I might have a photo. If I don't, I can always share a photo of what the flowers look like. They have very long yellow petals that are reversed like the other coneflowers. And it has a very tall dome, very like an echinacea as well. So it's a great flower. It does, unfortunately, one thing it does do is go winter dormant. So if you're going to use a perennial that does go winter dormant, there are not a huge amount here in Florida, but there are some that do go winter dormant. And if they totally go winter dormant and lose their leaves, you want to make sure you add something else with it so that you don't lose the total, everything out of there and have nothing in the pot. So that's a good way to add. That was why I added the aquatic milkweed, because that still gave me some form of greenery, and then the swamp twinflower is there as well. So that's something just to bear in mind if a plant does go winter dormant, that you make sure you still keep that in there as well. Now, these are additional plants for wetland or aquatic plants. The Scarlet Hibiscus is a stunning flower. It is huge. It's most probably the size of a small dinner plate. And it is really pretty. Again, that one is winter dormant, so it totally disappears in the winter time. So you want to add something in there that will actually give you something when it is not flowering. Cardinal Flower is one of my favorite red flowers in the summertime. It is a wetland. I have actually seen it literally growing, floating in water almost. So it does definitely like a lot of water. Again, that is a great one for our hummingbirds. They really enjoy that one. Hog fruit we've talked about before, golden canna. Now cannas, there are also do they flower? I think they flower in the springtime. Again, a beautiful golden yellow, but that one is also very striking leaves. So I mean, that would add some nice contrast to the Scarlet Hibiscus. And I don't think the cannas go dormant in the winter, so you'll always have that. Pickle weed is another one that I have actually used in a wetland pot. And that one I have added some horsetail fern and pickle weed. What else did I put in there? Anyway, the pickle weed is a great plant for hummingbirds. I have seen the hummingbirds come to it when it is flowering, and it's also a really unusual blue. So it's a really great one to put in a pot. That one again also does go winter dormant. So you have to watch that with some of the aquatic or wetland plants. They do go dormant. Let's have a look. So these are some of the pots that I've done. The one on the with the little gargoyle standing in front of, that one is that pot is about 6 years old. It has rosin flower and swamp twinflower. Every year, all I do for that one is trim back the rosin flower to the ground, so just above the where the big basil leaves are, and the swamp milkweed, swamp twin flower, I just cut that back in the springtime before it starts to get new growth so that it's nice and fresh. This is a good time to actually talk about maintenance on pots, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that don't really know or when to or how to maintain. As I said, the tropical sages, they sometimes need deadheading, and deadheading any form of sage is very easy because it's a square stem. It's very easy to nip it out. And when you look at it, you will see that usually the plant has a flower spike in the middle and then two new growths that are coming up on either side, and two new little branching. What you need to do is once the middle centerpiece is finished flowering, you nip it out. You can use your fingernails. You can just take a pair of scissors or clippers and just clip that out. What that does, it just promotes more flowering and it flower a longer time. Rosin flower, that one you can deadhead if you wanted to. And that one, it's a little more tricky because it's hard to tell sometimes what is a spent flower and what is not. The spent flowers actually almost look like a miniature flower, but a solid green one. So once you determine the difference between the bud and the spent flower, it's a little easier. That one, as I said, you don't have to trim back, but if you do trim it back occasionally, it does promote flowering for longer periods. And the flowers on that will last pretty well almost for a full year. What you find with rosin flower, what normally happens is once they start to get less and less flowers later on in the season, is you need to just come in and cut right down to where the leaves are so that it has a new, so it promotes new growth. Tropical sage will also do that sometimes in the winter time. Once they get too leggy and too woody, they will start to get new growth at the bottom. So you can actually come in and cut all the branches or the stems out right to the ground. And then it just promotes a whole new growth and a whole new plant. Swamp twin flower, as I said, that one does benefit from a little trim late winter, very early spring. You'll get dried pieces from the stem, and you can just cut that back with a pair of shears and it comes back really nice. Lyre leaf sage is another one that needs to be deadheaded after it's finished flowering. Any of the sages, if you trim them back or deadhead them, they will promote more flowering. The Corky stem passion vine, as you can see, the middle picture, that was taken recently, so that is a year later on that pot, and the rosin flower is flowering. The Corky stem is spread nicely around the base of the plant, and the twin flower is flowering and doing its thing. If you this is on steps, so it has plenty of room for it to trail down. Like I said, if you wanted to, you could put a little piece of a trellis up the back, or you could grow it next to a trellis and let it grow up a trellis. That also works fine, and the Corky stem will be very happy, and the birds will be happy because there'll be plenty of berries for them to eat. The last one is the aquatic pot, and you'll notice that there is no saucer anymore. What we did with that one is we actually added in some irrigation. So it gets watered every day now, and that is plenty. It doesn't need the plant base at the bottom. And that's why I say, you know, depending on how you're watering them, if you're watering them every day and you can put a water source to them, this is watered, like I say, every day for 15 minutes, and it's plenty. It doesn't need the base to it. And I know people ask about mosquito problems by doing something like that with a water basin underneath or a gravel basin underneath. Yes, you could have problems with mosquitoes. The thing is to make sure you don't leave more than just covering of the gravel. It doesn't really give the mosquitoes enough room to grow in, so it wasn't too much of a problem. The other option, of course, is to have the aquatic plants in a water trough or something like that. We experimented with a galvanized stock tank as a pond, and it has been working great for 2 years now. We have aquatic milkweed in there. We have some brown savory in there. We also have the native water lily. And of course, any mosquitoes that go in there are eaten by the fish. So it works fine. So that is just a couple of different ways. Another pot that I had fun with, and I only put a single plant was some fog fruit. And I put that into a very tall, narrow pot. And that's kind of fun because what that does is it also allows the plant chance to hang over the side. Fog fruit, of course, is also a larval host plant and a nectar source. So that way you get, quite a lot of bang for your buck just in one pot. That can also go in sun or par shade. It doesn't mind either of those locations. So whatever you plant, have fun with it. you know, even the simplest pot's going to make such a difference. And by doing something like this, you know, you're making a difference to the environment, you know, you're making a difference to our pollinators who are in definite peril with all the stuff that we're doing. And by doing these little things, it's fun to watch, it's fun to have, and it gives you some little satisfaction in knowing that you're creating a small area. Even the smallest balcony, you can still have a pollinator pot up there, you know. Every little bit helps. Of course, if you have screens over the patio or the balcony, it's not going to really work. You have to be able to let the pollinators come in, otherwise it defeats the object. But have a go, try it, see what you do. Every little bit makes a difference, as I say. And this is Doug Tallamy is a mentor of mine. When I started learning about native plants, and before I actually started designing, Mark Gotts actually said to me at Green Isles, he said, you need to read this book before you start designing for me. And that is the reason I am so passionate about what I do, why I do what I do, because I know every little bit that I do makes a big difference. It is very true. Every little bit you do, every little plant you plant will bring them, and plant them, they will come. That is our motto at My Dragonfly Gardens, and it is very true. I have seen it firsthand year over year, native garden over native garden. Plant those type of plants, it will bring the pollinators, it'll bring the birds. By bringing the pollinators, you bring the birds. By bringing the birds, you creating that ecosystem. And that is what is important, to create the whole, not just part. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So that is my presentation regarding pollinators in a pot. If you have any questions or need any more information, I would be happy to answer them. Any questions or anything, please let me know. We are also looking for gardeners. We have a growing business. We need more people that are interested in helping us part-time. If you are interested, my email address is there. Please reach out. We cover Central Florida. Draw a circle on the map within an hour and a half radius of Claremont, and that's what we cover. So if anybody is interested in learning more about natives, or is passionate about natives and doesn't mind weeding, we would love to hear from you. So please give us a shout. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsten, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Let me get back on here. We do have quite a few questions. And again, just as a reminder, please use the Q&A feature for your questions. What did I do with that? What kind of pot do you recommend, or what kind of material do you recommend for a wetland or aquatic plants? Pot glazed or plastic, or does it matter?
You know, I have tried different things over the years, and you know, Florida, the climate here is pretty harsh on plastic pots. So glazed pots work really well. Terracotta is not a good idea for aquatic because it doesn't really hold moisture. It evaporates or dries out too quickly. So in saying that, I actually have a very old terracotta pot out here, and I forgot about it. It's a native plant, native pot, but it is a very thick, very old terracotta that has no hole. And I actually put horsetail fern, pickle weed, and a couple of other natives in there. And they have been in there for 2 years now. And all I do is every time, I think, you know, every other day, fill it up with water so it has water sitting there and it slowly seeps out. But for me, the ones that have worked the best is a form of glaze. You know, glazed pots down here handle the heat. We don't have the cold like up north, but we still have the heat. Plastic will deteriorate after time. So you have to look at that. You know, if money is tight and all you have is a black plastic pot from a nursery, use it. You can always cover it with something on the outside or put something around it to disguise it. But glaze does work really well.
Great. We have a question from somebody who lives in a high-rise condo. How many floors above ground will the butterflies fly?
Now that one is a very valid question. I honestly don't know how high. I know some butterflies of her, you know, they've recorded, I don't know if it was monarchs or which butterfly it was, pretty high up in the atmosphere. So, I mean, you know, that's kind of crazy. I suppose it depends how desperate the pollinators are for food and for flowers. You never know, you know, try it. It would be interesting to see, and then they can let us know.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone's done any research to see how effective pollinator gardens on rooftops and high rises are.
Well, you won't believe this, but I actually spoke to somebody, this is a few years ago now, but they were growing vines and a garden in Orlando on one of the buildings there. They had created a garden there, and they were growing native vines and different stuff. They actually came to us not with native vines in mind, and I tried to persuade them, and I hopefully managed to persuade them to start planting natives instead. So that's a rooftop. So I'm sure there must have been a way for pollinators to get to it. Otherwise, yeah, let's see if anybody has any information. I'd love to know.
Yeah, me too.
It'd be interesting.
Does I'm going to butcher this too, the retivita, the prairie coneflower, does it like wet feet?
Yes.
That's a wetter plant.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the ones that I grew in the wetlands pot, and it's really handled it well. I actually read some research that said it actually liked more dry after I'd put it in a wetland pot, but it's handled it fine. This is the second year, and when I saw it the other day, it was full of flowers. So it is handling it no problem.
And so for the wetland or the aquatic pots, you're using plants that you typically find in naturally growing in wet areas.
Yeah. Exactly. If you give some of the native plants that like very dry soil and you put them in a wetland pot, it's going to rot the roots. They're not going to like it. They'll die. So something like rosin flower, I'm sure that would die in no time if you put it in a wetland pot. It does not coexist it does not exist in those kind of conditions. It most probably would not last very long. And it's like blanket flower. No, sorry, not blanket flower. Black-eyed Susan, you put that in too much water and it would be absolutely miserable. So yeah, you have to look at where, do your research when you want to play with these things, look them up online. There are plenty of resources out there. FNPS, the Florida Wildflower, I use that a lot. I've always used that a lot because you have a lot of information out there. So definitely do the research first.
And we will be sending out a resource sheet to people who register for this webinar. And one of the resources we have is a handout on creating pollinator pots. And it has a list of plants that we recommend too, which of course many of the plants that Kirsten's talked about are on that list. And our lists always give you the soil moisture requirements and the sun requirements as a general gauge. So you will have that information to start from too.
Actually, sorry, Stacey.
No, go ahead.
I still, to this day, I still use your literature a lot of the times for gauging the moisture and the water, the sun or the shade and those type of things, because some plants I'm not using all the time. So of course you still need that. So seriously, your literature is super good. The information is super good. So kudos to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate hearing that.
Oh,
let's see. We have a few more questions. Somebody did ask about root rot and whether or not that is a problem when you're planting in pots. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So yeah, I haven't actually had any problems with root rot. Root rot usually occurs if there's too much moisture or if the plants are stressed. And a good way to gauge if your plant is stressed is if there is some problems with mealybugs or aphids or whitefly or any of those type of things on the plants. Those you're usually going to get more on shrubs and stuff like that. Sometimes black-eyed Susan, I know, does get mealybugs on it. So if your plant is stressed, you will often get outward signs of stress. What I mentioned about letting them get too dry as well is also a problem. You don't want to get the plants to that extent, because if the plant is stressed, it's going to get diseases, it's going to get problems. So I have never actually had an experience with root rot, but I think not in plants that are in pots, actually, plants that have been in the ground, but not in pots. So let me think. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't elaborate more on that, but just keep an eye on the plants. When you're watering them, if you don't have any form of irrigation going to them, but when you go and water them on a daily basis, look at the plant. The plants will tell you if the leaves are yellowing, or if you're getting spots on the leaves, or if they're wilting. plants in the garden, and it's valid for pots as well, I'm sure, is if a plant is wilting by the afternoon, it's okay. If the plant is still wilted in the morning the following day, then there is something wrong. It needs more moisture. So it is going to be a little bit of a balancing act to get that moisture level right. But if you're making sure that the water them until it runs through the bottom of the pot, in the summer, at least once a day, if it's in a hot, sunny spot, that should be valid. It should work.
Great. What's the best way to harvest seeds from the rosin flower?
That actually, I've been collecting them now because I've got some rosin flower outside my window here. You need to wait for pretty well any seeds if you want to collect them, especially rosin flower is one of them, but they need to be starting to go brown, and not just on the seed head, but actually going brown down the stem. If you harvest them too early, they won't be viable. So what you need to do is almost wait till the whole flower head has gone brown, and it starts to actually split open. So once you see that it's starting to go brown and the little the nectary tubes in the center of the flower, I'm sorry, I'm horrible at remembering all the parts of a flower, but the center of the flower in a rosin flower has a lot of little tubes, and I'm sure they're the nectary tubes. All the seeds are on the outer side of that. So as long as you take the whole part of the top of the flower off, once it's starting to go brown, they'll just fall apart. And that's how you know they're dry enough to be collected. And it's a plant. I love rosin flower. I use it everywhere. I use it in every design I do. If there's a hot sunny area, I put rosin flower in. And my favorite combination is rosin flower and giant ironweed behind it. You can't go wrong with those two.
Yes, the royal combination of yellow and purple.
And you know, it's two colors that are so important in nature. So you know, it's wonderful to see them happening. And I have seen in different parts of the country, actually, I have seen gold and purple flowering together, and a lot of the times it's goldenrod and ironweed. Mm-hmm. So my take is rosin flower and ironweed.
Awesome. Okay, do you have time for a few more questions?
I have as much time as you need. I didn't know how long I would talk for, so.
We usually try to wrap this up in an hour, but we still have a few minutes, and I've still got questions coming in. So
I will be happy
have you worked with any grasses in pollinator pots or creating pots?
I have not used grasses, actually, not in pollinator pots. My thing with the grasses a lot of the times is they take up a lot of room. The only one that I think might be, and actually a great one for more of a wetland pot might be the andropogons, the chalky blue stem. That might be an interesting one, because when it flowers, it has that very tall spike that comes up with the fluffy bits. So, I mean, that might be an interesting combination with some of the more wetlands. So if anybody wants to have a go and try it, please let me know. I would love to know how it works. I love muley, but muley takes up way too much room. You know, that's a 3-foot wide radius on something like that. So did they mention any grasses or not?
No, just asked if you used any.
Yeah, that would be the only one I think I would try, would be one of the andropogon.
All right. What can you tell us? You mentioned cutting back the Corky stem, and this was a question that was submitted, but I have that question too, because I've got a bunch volunteering in my yard. How far do you cut it back? When's the best time? The person asking the question said that their vine was naked right now. Is that the time to cut it? So here's the thing with any of our pollinator our larval host plants. And Corky stem, I don't know, would I cut that whole thing back? It does grow pretty quickly back onto the plant. Of course, if there's no leaves, then the pollinators, the caterpillars can't use them. So I would, how many stems are there? There are quite a few, or is it just a couple? Do they say? They did not.
Okay, so here's what I would do. I would cut half of it back to the ground, and I would leave half to see which grows the fastest, because that way you're not cutting it all back. Because if you think about it, it's the same as our native milkweeds. I always tell people, do not cut the native milkweed back, especially the swamp milkweed, because if you cut it all the way down the stem to the ground again, that plant has to regrow the whole stem as well as the leaves. Whereas if you leave the stem and the stick of greenery, as long as it's still green, the leaves will regenerate very quickly, because nature is growing that to be eaten. So it knows it has to reproduce very fast. So the Corky stem, I'm wondering, I have some outside my window here. Is it flowering? Usually I wouldn't cut the corky stem back until it was dead or it needed to be cut back. And I normally cut that back in the winter time. So that's why I'm saying if this person wants to try cut half of it back and leave half as it is, and then see if it regenerates leaves on the stems, or whether it grows back very quickly from the ground. Corky stem does normally grow pretty quickly in the summertime with our rains, which we're not getting a lot of, but it normally grows pretty quick from that. So yeah, try that. Otherwise, normally in the winter time.
Okay. What's the optimal depth for a pot for a plant in a pot, or what the optimal depth of the pot for the plants?
So you want to be able to give them, at least a few inches to grow and to flourish in. Because if you're going to try and cram a 1 gallon into a small pot, you're not giving it a lot of room to grow. All of those pots that I showed pictures of, I left at least an inch from the top down so that you have room to water. And then most of them had, even the big cream one, that one, I think there was still at least 2 to 3 inches underneath the plant of potting soil before I put the plant in. So you want to give them, give them at least 3 or 4 inches of space to grow. The rosin flower pot that, and I don't know if you want me to, I don't know if I can go back. The one in the blue pot, that one has been, like I said, it's been in there for 6 years this year. I have never amended the soil. I've given it some organic chicken poop, but that's it. So whatever soil is in there is obviously going to be absolutely full of roots. So the more soil you give it to grow into, they're going to use it. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
This one might not be something you can answer now, but someone's asking if you have photos of the stock tank that you created.
I sure do. It's that was my fun project. I will have to share those. So if they want, we can let me make a note of that.
It's easy to find, and you can send us a couple. We can include that in the email that we send out to everyone.
Yeah, oh yeah, I have photos. It's been my labor of love, and I have tried. So this is an interesting thing about the stock tank, right? I started off with a couple of koi in there, and I tried it twice. And we were using, we collect rainwater at that house. They collect the rainwater, and we were using that in the pond. And there was also the aquatic milkweed, and of course the caterpillars are around in the summertime, and they eat leaves and they poop. And we lost one of the koi, and then the next one started getting sick, and I thought, okay, hang on a minute, what's going on? So I stopped the rainwater, because of course the rain comes off an asphalt roof, and the asphalt, I don't think it hurts vegetables or whatever, but for the fish, especially koi, they're very susceptible and very pernickety. So I stopped doing that. And I do have, the pond does have a filtration system, very simple, pond pump and that. And then the second koi died. I came to the realization that it was the aquatic milkweed, because aquatic milkweed is toxic and the caterpillars were eating it and pooping it out into the water. It was making the fish sick. So how crazy was that? So now we have to monitor it. And then if there gets too many caterpillars on the milkweed, at the moment, there's no leaves left. They've eaten it all. So the caterpillars just have to be moved off and put onto a milk vine or some other milkweed. So yes, it was a very interesting trial and error. And there were 7 goldfish in there, and they're now, some of them are, good 4 or 5 inches. So they're thriving and they're doing great. So it was a fun project. So I will definitely find photos and I will share those with you.
Great, thank you. Okay, just a couple quick questions and we'll wrap this up. Sure. Does it help to hold moisture in the pollinator pot if you add mulch like leaves or pine straw? Do you recommend that?
I have tried that. I've tried pine bark before. I've tried leaves. It definitely will help to keep some moisture in. Of course, when you think about it, with the swamp twin flower, that swamp twin flower will eventually grow and cover the top of the pot. So you won't have the space to be able to put stuff like that in. But adding, actually taking some rotted organic oak leaves, some rotted oak leaves, that will be a great way to add some nutrients into the pot. So I've had before somebody that I know actually put some leaf matter in the bottom of the pot when they actually add the potting soil on top. So you kind of have that organic matter that is in there. But Pine bark didn't work that well. Not if you're trying to put multiple plants in there, because of course it will stop them from spreading. But definitely leaves or things like that would be, I don't think there should be a problem. Pine straw doesn't really work that great until, well, and once the pod is established, then you won't need to put anything, but experiment, try stuff. There's no harm in trying. It's not going to hurt anything as long as you know there's been no chemicals on those plants, because, you know, and that is something, this is just an FYI, I see this on a daily basis. When I'm out there doing gardens or with clients installing new gardens. Bear in mind that your pots are going to be eaten by plants. So please, I'm sure most people are aware, don't put them anywhere near somebody who's going to be spraying turf or anything like that with chemicals, because those plants are being eaten by insects. And our pollinators and our insects have enough of a hard time without it. So try not to put them anywhere near where they're likely to get drift or spray from anything. That's just a pet peeve of mine, because I see it way too often, the problems and the causes from that.
Yeah, and something you don't think about when you're doing the right things in your yard, and you know, kind of forget what's going on around you.
And that is something that is just being aware, you know, of seeing, you know, take a look. We were at a garden yesterday, and it was the most depressing garden I think I've ever been in, because it had native plants in there, but it was done, and this is another thing, for the wrong reason. And there was not an insect inside.
Wow.
And it's just incredibly sad to see that these people did it for the right reason. And now it's the wrong reason, because there is no life there. It's the plants are there, but they're not doing anything. So it's something to really be aware of, and just make, you know, it's pollinator week. So let's give the pollinators a chance.
Yes. Okay, last question. Have you any experience with planting pollinator pots in garden bags?
Ooh, interesting. No, I've grown veggies in garden bags, but I've never tried pollinator pots. I don't see why it won't work. It's the same thing. It's still a now they mean as in bags, like in veggie bags, or what do they mean?
Not sure. That's all. There was no additional information. I'm just picturing like those burlap, or you know, the
felt ones or things like that. So they will dry out pretty quick. So I would make sure you keep them well mortared. Sometimes those, you know, I've seen them used for veggies and they work great for vegetables. So I don't see why not. It's just a case of keeping on top of the watering and make sure there's enough water going in there.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been a really good, just very informative presentation. Again, everyone who is here, this will be, the recording will be sent to you in about 24 to 48 hours, along with resources from the foundation, as well as the resources that Kirsten used in her presentation. So just keep an eye out for that. And again, if you like what you see here, you like what we do, please consider becoming a member, getting the license plate, making a donation. You can do all of that through our website, flawildflowers.org. Thank you again, Kirsten of mydragonflygardens.com. If you need help coming up with a design or some landscape help, give them a call. They are great to work with. So mydragonflygardens.com, we'll include that in the resource email that we'll send you as well. So thank you, Kirsten. Thanks to everyone who hung out.
Thank you so much for having me. And anything that any more questions or anything like that, feel free to shoot to Stacy or me. I would be happy to answer anything I can. And have fun. That is the main reason why we do what we do. If you don't love what you do, then what is the point of doing it? And in Florida, it's a great place to grow some incredible plants. There is a way to do so much difference and so much good, but have fun with it. Thank you very much for having me, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.